Welcome. Good morning. We are here for our PDA 2020 Measures and Methods Session 4, which is all about quality improvement, one of my favorite topics. So welcome. I am Lynette Thielen. I'm a senior consultant here at CCSI, and I will be your guide for today. We also have some other folks standing by to monitor any questions that you send into the chat. So please jump in if you have questions. Happy to make this interactive. That's the way that it's best for all of us to learn. So today we are going to take a look back at the previous sessions and just kind of reground on where we've been before today. And that really sets the stage for our topic today, which is quality improvement. So we'll look at some kind of foundational ideas about quality improvement. We'll look at the quality improvement process in more detail. And we will always, as always, leave some time at the end for some questions. Okay, so, excuse me. If we look back at some of our previous topics, we spent some time as we were beginning this session about understanding the culture of change. And just to bring in some of the key concepts from that, we really want to make sure that as you move into a process of change, which implementing a quality improvement project is doing just that, you want to build on the strengths of the culture that you are existing in. Always aligning buy-in by making sure everyone is aligned on the purpose is a great idea. And acknowledging that the perfect environment doesn't really exist. So you have to kind of work within the strengths and restrictions of the environment you're in and do the best with what you have. And realize that change can happen one thing at a time, one person, one project at a time. And sometimes that's the best way to implement change, kind of a moving forward step by step. As we've gone through this session, we've also acknowledged that we are existing in a very different environment than we were a year ago. The pandemic has obviously shifted the way we work, the way we interact. It's a rapidly changing environment. As you know from even this week, things kind of change as the situation around COVID changes in terms of what we can and can't do in our society and in our workplaces. And data is really necessary to navigate that change. It's a really key element. The other thing that we understand too is that we don't and we can't really operate in silos. So financial operations and clinical operations are intertwined. So when we look at our data, we need to look at those things together. So as we move into data, the importance of key performance indicators is critical. These are quantifiable measures that you use to evaluate the success in meeting the performance objectives of your organization. And these are really the crucial indicators that help you understand if you're progressing towards an intended result. So we spent a lot of time talking about what those are and thinking about what those might be for your organization. We also, suggested that if you don't know where to start, engagement and access are some of the great places to start in terms of key performance indicators. From there, we spent a lot of time talking about and working on our measures. So defining our measures was kind of a nuts and bolts session, but really a time well spent, right? So it's important to document your measures. Make sure you have descriptions and definitions not only documented, but understood within your organization. That helps make sure that you have a replicable process. And we talked about the importance of SMART measures, right? Specific, measurable, achievable, which is a really important one that we sometimes forget, relevant and time limited. And understanding that you have to sometimes balance the data that you want versus the resources and the time and energy that's necessary to get to that data. From there, we talked about turning that raw data into business intelligence. And a big part of that comes from visualizing our data. And sometimes getting to visualize the data isn't always easy. We're dealing with data sources, multiple data sources from different systems, from different areas. We kind of pull all that together so we get the complete picture. But the good news is there's a lot of power in the tools that you have right in Excel, which we all have and use. So we showed you a little bit about that. Then we talked about the importance of a communication strategy and making sure that there's clarity on who your audiences are for communicating about your measures, about your projects, and understanding how to best communicate that with them. And making sure that you have really consistent messages and that you just keep in mind the key strategies for a good communication process. So that's a little bit about where we have been and what we've talked about in our previous sessions. So what are we gonna dive into today? So today is all about quality improvement. So we're gonna talk about leveraging your data to help you drive change. So we've created a really good foundation for you to start to do your measurement, to gather information, to turn that information into business intelligence. Now, once you've done that, you're gonna start to see there's areas where you might be able to improve or you might want to improve. We'll talk about some quality improvement models, and we'll identify how you can find opportunities to implement meaningful change, and then talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of a quality improvement cycle. So kind of planning and implementing that cycle. How do you go about doing that? Okay, so let's start with your data, which is what is going to really be an indicator to you to what you want to change, what you need to change. So we've been talking about, doing measures. We've been talking about gathering data, turning that into visualization. Once you do that, you start to be able to see, what that data is telling you. So are you seeing your data? Is your data showing you that your measures are higher or lower than you expected? I always think it's kind of interesting as you go into a measurement process to think about what you expect to see from that data. So if you're just starting to implement your measures on access and engagement or other measures, what do you think your engagement rate is? And then when you get the data, is that different than what you thought it might be? So the other thing that you're going to ask yourself is, well, what needs to change? And the data may give you something very glaringly obvious that you say, okay, this is something we need to work on. We need to make this rate better. We need to do more of this. So, it might be engagement. It might be show rates at appointments. It might be completing the initiation intake appointment, things like that. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that while your data is the key to this, sometimes the ideas about what you need to change might come from other sources. It might be somebody saying, hey, this isn't working as well as it could, or I think we're seeing a lot of this happen. And you can then use your data to kind of substantiate those thoughts. So, don't limit yourself, allow all the voices to be heard so that you can really get to some good content to change. And before you dive into changing things, you really have to make sure that you've got the capability to measure that change. So you've probably started the baseline information to say, where am I at now? Because you need that starting point to know if something has changed. And can I gather the data that I need to be able to describe what happens after the change? So you need data to describe before, and you need data to describe after. One thing that I like to make sure we're all clear on is the difference between quality assurance versus quality improvement. So, and they can kind of feed into each other. But quality assurance is really a compliance kind of measurement. It's a monitoring and an inspection process. And the objective of a quality assurance measurement is to make sure that you have hit a desired target. Understanding if you're not hitting a target can identify that a problem exists, and then that would put you into a quality improvement process. So things that our quality assurance can be things like kind of chart audits is a good example of a quality assurance, to make sure that all of the required fields are complete, is all of the required information in the summary. Do you have the right indicators selected? Do you have the right notes? Things like that. That's a quality assurance process. When you move to quality improvement is not a kind of one and done thing. It's a continuous improvement cycle, and it's focused very much on systems and processes. And out of a quality improvement cycle, you're trying to find measurable improvement. And generally, you're either looking to improve performance or solve a problem. So we need to get our show rates up by 5%. We need our engagement to hit a target of XYZ. Those are quality improvement measures and processes. This is really a very simplified view of our worlds, but we can kind of break down the delivery of care into three large components. There's the structural component, which is the people and the technology, the environment, the infrastructure, the information that you have. There's the process component, which is how is the care delivered, what is done, how is it done? And the structure and the process together drive the outcomes, which is the outcomes are the services that are actually delivered. The outcomes are any changes in behavior or health, and outcome is client satisfaction. It's a very simple model, but it's a great framework to say, how do I start to think about this environment I'm in and where quality improvement fits in? And your data basically tells you where your opportunities are to improve. And at the end of the day, a quality improvement cycle is trying to impact outcomes. So there's a lot of quality improvement models out there. We have a couple of versions of Lean Six Sigma. DMAIC, which is define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. DMADV, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one. There's actually even another one called DMEDI, which is very similar to this one. So that's a define, measure, analyze, design, and verify. And the difference between those two are if you're dealing with an existing process that you want to improve, or which is DMAIC, or the other one is if you're actually implementing kind of an all new process. And Lean Six Sigma is, it originated really with manufacturing processes, but it applies to all kinds of processes. And the lean part is really about taking out non-value add activity. So where
nobody wants to see anybody struggling. So, you know, please.
So where are we, you know, not using our resources wisely? Where can we cut out waste, that type of thing. A couple other processes are FADE, which stands for focus, analyze, develop, execute. I've also seen it where it's execute and evaluate, so you have two E's on the end. And that's a kind of similar in terms of to Lean Six Sigma in terms of you're defining and verifying the process that needs to be improved, you're collecting some data and analyzing it, and you're executing a quality improvement cycle. We also have plan, do, study, act, which is really a model for testing out a change. So it's, you plan something that you want to do, you try it, you study or check the results, and then you decide on your next action, which might be doing another cycle. So really all of this to say that there are several different models for quality improvement. There's similarities between the models. There's different kinds of activities that the models are best suited for. But at the end of the day, what they do is they provide some structure for your quality improvement effort. And some of the benefits of these models include being able to align on the purpose. So there's a lot of a component of documentation of your objectives and your plan, There's a structure that asks you to get stakeholder and team buy-in. It helps you focus, really just documenting what you're doing and having some structure around how you're going to do it really makes gives you an opportunity to focus the team on what it is you're trying to achieve, clarifies what's in scope, and sometimes more importantly, what's not in scope. So sometimes it feels like there's just so much that you can change. And when you define what you're doing within these quality improvement models, it really lets you hone in on what are we going to do, what are we going to impact, and what is not going to be impacted right now. At the end of the day, it's a guided structured process, so there's really some benefit to it. So before we dive into let's make a change, we want to dig a little bit deeper and get to the root of the problem. And we have a tool and an exercise to do that. And one of the reasons that you want to kind of get down to the root cause is that sometimes we can go into a quality improvement cycle and think that we know the answer. And you might be right, but you might not be right. So the recommendation is to take a little bit of time to actually do a little bit of root cause brainstorming and understand the variety of things that might be causing the challenge that you're seeing. That allows you to really work on the changes that you believe to be the most impactful to shifting your outcomes. So a tool that we have, and this is not the only tool that you can use to do this, but this one is a real helpful way to look at what's causing the problem, it's called a Fishbone diagram tool. And this really helps you break down and brainstorm all the possible contributing factors to a particular problem that you want to improve or challenge that you want to improve. One thing that I would say in terms of this kind of exercise is it's really a great idea to make sure that you have a good diverse group of perspectives. So you want individuals from different areas of your organization that are kind of part of the challenge that you're having so that they can give their perspective. So this is a brainstorming exercise, sort of the more the merrier in terms of the inputs and also the ideas. You can spend a little bit of time later on kind of honing in on what you need to do with those ideas. And this is a tool that we have posted on the team site, just showing you kind of a bigger version so you can see it. And each bone of the fish bone is a topic, and you will brainstorm underneath that topic, and the head of the fish is where you put the problem statement. So we're going to do an exercise to work on using this tool. We're going to move into breakout discussion groups in a moment. And just to remind you of how this works best in terms of a breakout group, make sure that there's an opportunity for everybody to talk and share their thoughts. Keep an eye on the time. Before you start brainstorming, decide who's going to take some notes and report back. And our report back today, we're going to do that through chat. So we're going to have whoever's reporting back just type in your topic, which is your topic that we give you from the Fishbone diagram, like communication is one, and then just one root cause that you've brainstormed that you want to share. You'll probably brainstorm a lot more, but we're going to just ask you to put one in the chat for us. So the scenario that we've put into play is around engagement. And in our organization, engagement is defined as 2 or more therapeutic visits within 30 days of the initiation visit. Our data has shown us that we're seeing a significant drop off in attendance for the second appointment or future appointments. So we're going to, in the chat, we're going to indicate what your group number is, or the topic for each group number. So as you go into your breakout room, Just keep an eye for what group number you are, and then check the chat for what your topic is. And then just brainstorm root causes for your assigned topic. And we've got about 15 minutes set aside for that. So Jocelyn, I know you're gonna move us into the breakout rooms. Anything else you want to let people know before we head into the rooms?
I don't think so. I'm going to do that shortly. I've just pasted your topics in the chat. Please chat me if you have any questions. Everybody is in 1 through 12. All CCSI folks will be in number 13. And here we go.
Let me just change this. Okay. Just to remind you what we wanted to do in terms of reporting out, which some of you are already doing, just type into everybody what your group topic was and what one of your brainstorming ideas. So I'll give you a few moments to get some topics in there. And if you post it to everyone, that would be great, because then we can all see the information. So I'll just give it another moment for you to type some things into the chat, and then we'll take a look. Great. Okay, so there's some stuff coming in here. Let me just scroll back and see some of the things. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of start throwing out some of the ideas. So things like access to technology and knowledge on how to use it. That could certainly be, I would imagine, related to like telehealth appointments. Not a priority, that there's other priorities like work and school, location. So if somebody's physically going a long distance away, they might just not be able to get to the location. Some other things in regards to the environment. So maybe if they have to go to the physical environment, it feels overcrowded. They have concerns about confidentiality or privacy for clients. So if they're, again, I think that's like a telehealth thing. Or just the environment doesn't feel warm and inviting. Lack of transportation. A couple of things about the environment, the look and feel of the office. Does it feel welcoming if they're going on site? And also about safety concerns, right? Is there sanitizer, masks? Do they feel like they can come in and do social distancing? Transportation concerns again, could be, so now in terms of the patient and client, perception of how the session went. So did the client and the therapist connect? Is it a good match? Is it because of the therapist, or do they just simply not return? Some procedures and policy ideas in terms of there isn't a policy in place around reminder calls. There's no discussion with the client about their expectation. Maybe just people can't get to the clinic if it's on a higher floor. There's mobility issues. Scheduling. Even triaging maybe what the concerns were before the client left, right? So things like the fee, maybe that would be something that was an issue. And somebody made a suggestion about patient surveys, could give you insight. That's absolutely a great idea. Communication, things like appointment reminders, and asking the clients question about barriers. Customer service related concerns, connection with other providers, locating the client if they're having difficulty, and access to technology, calls, text, telehealth. Maybe there's the customer doesn't have that, and then again, lack of conversation about the expectation of the second appointment. So lots of great ideas. I'll ask one of my support folks on the line to make sure they cut and paste the chat, and we can make sure we post that in our team site so you can get back to those. But basically what you did there is exactly what we would want to see in a brainstorming session. Lots and lots of ideas. That we're contributing to that challenge, the problem statement that we suggested. So once you do that, you basically have a basis for like, well, what am I going to change But you've generated a ton of ideas. So what do you do with all those ideas? And really the way to kind of take all these various ideas and figure out where do you go first is to just do like a really simple ranking kind of a scoring system. So first of all, what I don't think I saw a lot of brainstorms that were completely out of the organization's control, which I really, really like. If you are flagging a lot of causes that are completely outside of your control, you're not really setting yourself up to move into a change process. So if that happens, what I would suggest is you kind of keep digging a little bit deeper and asking why a few more times and seeing if you can get to things that are root causes that you can address. If you have a couple of root causes that are just, completely out of your control, that's fine. You can kind of put them off to the side. But then take your other root causes and just rank them based on two factors: the likelihood for that to occur and the severity of it, or like how much it would contribute to your problem statement. And if you do a high, medium, low scale, a 5, 3, 1 scale, and you just multiply those two scores, what you see very quickly is which root causes are bubbling up to the top. So the ones that are most likely and most severe in terms of the, the problem statement are going to be the ones that you want to go after first. So that really sets you up to say, geez, what changes should I make? And that was really the point of that entire exercise. So my point is, don't just dive into the quality improvement cycle. Take a minute to do this exercise first and really hone in on the changes that are going to make the biggest difference. Okay, so now we've got some things to work on, just kind of revisiting that very simple structure we looked at before. So we know that the structure and the process drive our outcomes. So when we look at those root causes, we're generally making changes to the structure components or the process components in an effort to change the outcomes. So that's very simply what we're doing there. So as you're planning for change, really there's some basic steps to start to move into that. And in the planning cycle, you're going to set your goal. So, what's the question that you're trying to answer? What problem are you trying to solve? And what are you aiming to accomplish or improve? So in our problem statement, we were saying that we were getting a drop off after our first appointment. So we were trying to improve the show rate at second appointments. So that's really the goal that we're trying to do. And then setting a target. So are we trying to improve it by 10%? Are we trying to improve it by 20%? That kind of thing. You want to make sure that as part of your planning, you document the current state. We talked about that a little bit before. You don't know if something has changed unless you have your baseline data. So that's a pretty critical element. And make sure you're really specific about your target outcome. So when we make statements like, well, we want to improve our show rates, that's a lovely statement, but it's not very specific. So you really want to put something in there. We want to improve by 5%. We want to increase by 10%. We want to meet a target of 95%. That gives you something very specific to aim for. And also you want to make sure it's an achievable target. So if you're currently at a rate of 75% for something and you say, we want to go to 100%, it's very likely you've just set a goal that's not going to be achievable. What's going to happen in that case is you're going to start to lose momentum. Your team and those working to implement the change are going to feel like, I can't get there. So why would I put this effort in? So make sure you really think about whether that target is achievable. Once you've kind of set that stage in your planning, you really want to get specific about what you're going to do and how you're going to measure it. And defining your activities is really outlining exactly what's going to change. And this is where you get very specific. So what needs to be done differently? What new activities need to be implemented? In our example that we used for brainstorming, some of the ideas were things like, well, they didn't get a reminder about their second appointment. So they don't know that it even, they don't even remember it's there. Or there wasn't a lot of communication about the importance of the second appointment. So if you're going to change one of those things, if you're going to implement appointment reminders, that's your activity. But don't just outline, we're going to implement appointment reminders. Who's going to do it? What's the trigger for when they're going to do it? Are they engaged and know that they're responsible for this activity? And depending on, where you're making this change, you might need to update some workflows, processes, communication tools, things like that. So make sure those pieces are part of what you're going to be changing. And then secondly, how do you know that change has occurred? So what data points do you need to know to answer that question? What data are you going to be collecting and reviewing? When? How often? And it might just be that you're continuing to measure something that you were measuring before that indicated there was a problem. You might, if you're implementing something completely new, you might need some new tracking. So if you're implementing a new activity like that appointment reminder, you might need to start measuring that all the clients that get an appointment reminder for their second appointment. So you might have to actually do some new measures. So just make sure those are all defined, who's going to do them, when, etc. And just like we mentioned before, even before you start to get results, do a little bit of thinking ahead. Like, what's going to happen if we see this increase or decrease, or like, what are we expecting and what might we do if it goes in this direction or that? It just kind of starts to frame ahead of time what you think you might see. Wanted to loop back to change management, which was one of our topics in our very first session, because when you're implementing a quality improvement cycle, you are implementing change. So just want to revisit some important components of change management. The reality with change management is that the change management is in all phases of your project. So it's in your planning cycle, it's in the implementation. So you're managing change while you're implementing. And then most importantly, there's a component after you've done your quality improvement cycle. So very often we learn something really valuable in our quality improvement cycle. We discover something that maybe works really well. But there's some change management that has to happen to make sure that that stays in place if you've actually chosen this is going to be a permanent change. All too often, we go through a sort of a project and there's this focus and it's like, oh, we're going to do this thing. Yes, it worked. That's great. And then if you don't reinforce the change, have some things in place to make sure that there's checks and balances that it is happening, it can just kind of fade away. So just know that change management is the entire cycle. In terms of the main components, some of the important things to keep in mind are sponsorship. So do you have some sponsorship for your quality improvement cycle? Do you have somebody in leadership that is kind of leading the charge and supporting that effort? That's going to be hugely important to the success of your activity. Communication is always a key component. So in our last session, we talked about a communication plan. I would build a communication plan for your quality improvement project. It's important. Training, which is, how do you get that change out to everyone who needs to know? And coaching is a little bit of a next level of training. So when you implement a change, very often, not everybody adopts it. So coaching is kind of who do I need to work with one-on-one to really help make sure this change comes into play and gets adopted. And then lastly, there's resistance management, which we know that in a perfect world, we would love everybody to say, hey, we're all on board and we all want to do this, but sometimes we run up against resistance. So there is an effort that needs to be undertaken to say, okay, where am I getting resistance? Why? And how can I help adjust and shift that? And I think coaching is really a part of that too, in terms of working sometimes one-on-one with individuals to help them come on board to the change. So just a kind of reminder of all the important components of change management. So we have an action plan tool, which helps you put together all of the pieces that you that you need, that we just talked about. Really, it's a place where you can document what are my goals, what's the current state, what are my target outcomes, and what am I going to do to drive improvement. If you are in the other PDA financial session, this will look very familiar. It's the same format. Again, it's just that structure to kind of help you make sure you have all the pieces put together. This is posted on the team site. So please feel free to use it to help structure your quality improvement activity. So we've talked a lot about kind of the input into your quality improvement cycle. But what happens when you start to get, you've implemented, you start to get some information. Now you have to sort of think about, okay, what happened and what do I do with that? So these are kind of some thought starter questions for you when you start implementing your quality improvement cycle. So what kind of feedback have you gotten from staff or others about the activities that you implemented? And that could be individuals that are having to implement the change. That could be individuals that are being impacted by the change. How do those changes compare to the effort required to achieve them? We've had this discussion sometimes about data, right? So we know there might be some data that we want to get, but we realize it's a hugely manual effort, and it's sometimes worth the effort to get it. And sometimes we have to say, oh, it's not worth all that effort. And so you have to look at that with your changes. How resource intensive was the change? How much additional work and effort is it putting on people? And is it achieving the impact that you want to? In many cases, it's going to be worth the effort. In some cases, you have to weigh that and see if it is. It's a great time to also look at what barriers arose. So when you're doing, this approach that we're talking about is very much built off of like a PDSA type of cycle. And when you're doing that and you're testing change, you're probably going to think about, well, am I going to implement this on a broad scale? Am I going to make this a permanent change? So understanding what barriers arose in your test is going to really help you when you go to implement it on a larger scale. So what happened with these changes that maybe made it difficult or challenging? How did you address them? Or how would you address those if you were doing things on a larger scale? Of course, you're going to look at your data. What does the data show us? What was there change? Did we achieve the target? If you didn't achieve the target, did you move in the right direction? If you did or didn't achieve the target, what exactly do you think contributed to that? So really kind of taking the time to think about the actions that you took and the results. And again, this is something that should be done with a diverse team, just like that root cause brainstorming, so that you really have different inputs and different perspectives, because that's really just going to make your thought process richer and that much better. Okay, so defining your next steps. It's called continuous quality improvement for a reason. It's a cycle that goes over and over and over. So once you've had a chance to implement some change, test it out, you really got to think about what happens next. Now, based on what you did, it could be you tested a change in maybe a small area, in one program, in one location. Are you going to do that on a broader basis? Do you feel like you have enough information to fully go out and deploy it? Or do you need to do another test in another area just to validate that, yeah, this is actually working and we want to make this a permanent change? You may not come out of your first quality improvement cycle saying, yeah, I'm ready. We're ready to make a change. This is a new thing we need to do. Let's put this in place. You might say, well, okay, that worked okay, but it didn't seem to have the impact we thought it would. You might go back to your root cause list and say, okay, let's test a different root cause. Maybe I test the next one down the list in terms of priority. Maybe testing it in a different program or a department is actually what you need to do to learn everything you need. So you may go into another quality improvement cycle, you know, and seek to learn something new. And sometimes doing a couple rounds of these kind of more rapid versions of change, you can kind of look at all of the results and say, okay, what did I learn from this process and where do we need to go? And then the other thing to kind of keep in mind as you work towards closing this round of quality improvement, one of the maybe the challenges of the fact that you're looking at things from a continuous quality improvement perspective is that sometimes you forget to stop and say, hey, we did this thing, we got some results. And before you dive into the next thing, make sure you take a moment to say, we need to communicate these results. We need to talk to some others in our organization about what we did and also celebrate your achievements. So if you've got a team that's worked on a quality improvement cycle, take a moment to say, hey, job well done. This is great. Here's what we learned. Now we're going to think about doing another one. So, so something important to remember. Okay, so those are the basics of a quality improvement cycle. In terms of where you go next, take a moment to revisit the data that you've been gathering as we've gone through the previous sessions. You should have some start on your data. When you have enough data to take a look at it, you'll be able to identify some opportunities for change. We have a couple tools for you in terms of the Fishbone diagram tool that can help you identify root causes. If you are going to move into a quality improvement cycle, I definitely suggest that you take a minute to do some sort of brainstorming and identify what the root causes are for your challenge and use that to help you prioritize what you're going to do with your quality improvement cycle. We also have an action plan for you to fill out, which gives you the structure that you need to just make sure you've got the components outlined of what you're going to do with your quality improvement cycle. And when we talked about the change management and the importance of our stakeholders and sponsorship, that action plan can be a really great communication tool with your stakeholders to say, okay, here, we've outlined what we're going to do. We need your support in terms of communicating that this is a priority for our organization. So use that action plan as a communication tool. We are going to have office hours next week and from noon to 1 on the 17th. And you've got lots of tools to kind of get rolling in this, but this is probably the most in-depth and complicated part of what we've been talking about. So definitely bring your questions to office hours. I think we've got a few things kind of coming up in chat, which is perfect timing because we are at the point where we will open it up for questions and discussion. I'm going to take a peek at the chat as soon as I can bring that up. Whoops. There we go, sorry. Okay. Just taking a moment to see what we've got in the chat here. Sorry, we've got lots of stuff from before. Okay, so I thought that another contributor to a lack of success sustaining change is the development of person-dependent systems or systems whose success relies heavily on one to a few key individuals, particularly in human service organizations where staff turnover is high. That, Ryan, is a really, really excellent point. And I have seen situations where organizations are struggling because they have had an individual or individuals who basically had the knowledge in their head and they left and went on to do something else. And they really had to rebuild that knowledge base. So that is a great point. What I would say in regards to that and in regards to kind of preventing that scenario from happening is documentation is your friend. So the person who sort of knows everything about that one thing, that if you identify that I've got this one person, and if here's the test I like to use, if they win the lottery and decide they don't need to come back to work tomorrow, what's going to be missing? So take the time to really think about those cases, and make sure you start to have some documentation about that great knowledge that's up in their head, so that if they do move on to something else, you've got some sense of what it is that they're doing, and you can replicate that with somebody else. Of course, things like cross-training also can help with that. And they can feel like things that are challenging and things that you don't have time for, because we're all really busy and we've got lots going on. But the reality is you will spend at least twice as much time if you don't do that work up front. So very good point. Yeah, and Ryan just kind of brought up another point in conjunction, which I think just bolsters what I was just saying, right? It's beneficial to assume that 100% staff attrition rate when you're developing your processes to ensure the process being developed are systemic and not person-centered. Absolutely, 100% agree. Also in your chat, just so you know, because it's kind of coming in between some of our discussion, there's a link that we would like you to go to for a final evaluation of this whole PDA session. It's going to be emailed to you. We're going to also post it in Teams. If you have a chance to grab it from the chat, that is great. We definitely want to hear your feedback. We want to hear what worked well, what ideas you have on how this could be better for you. What other information would be useful for you in these kinds of sessions, and what you got out of it. So please, please, please take the time to do that for us. I will pause and see if there are any other questions, comments, discussion at this point. You can just chat something into the chat box. You can certainly come off of mute and ask a question if you'd like. I'll just give it another minute to make sure we have a chance for everybody to get any questions in. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else come through. So again, thank you so much for your participation. Office hours next week. Oh wait, there might be something else in the chat. Oh, the thank yous are coming in. Thank you very much. All right, have a great day, and come to office hours with questions or post it in Teams, and go make quality improvements.